Oh hey, long time no see. What brings you to this decrepit old facility? Oh, this? Don't mind this. Just your average run-of-the-mill, highly volatile perpetual energy source. I just nabbed it from inside and was headed back to my trusty old ship. She's a real beaut, ain't she? The old girl and I have been through a lot of adventures together over the years, trying to uncover the secrets of this world in which we live, and all the while having to make time to collect some of that old junk that the company keeps going on and on about. It kinda gets you thinking, why do we have to collect all this stuff? I used to think maybe the company was using it for something, but I don't know. I've heard rumors in the old logs that the tentacle guy behind the counter eats it, and all other manner of abominable stories besides. It's definitely something I'd like to get to the bottom of, but where do you even start? Oh, I know. Why not fly over to the company now and pay them a visit? You can even come with me. Oh, come on, don't be scared, it'll be great. We'll just fly right over and see for ourselves what's going on. What could possibly go wrong? Since the dawn of Lethal Company, there's been one pervasive question. What is in the company building? It's a question that seems, at times, to be deceptively simple to answer, yet there's plenty of good reason why players new and old are still asking it. It goes without saying that the company is an omnipresent force throughout our adventures, so much so that it's not hard to lose sight of just how vast and powerful their reach actually is. It's the company that has loaned us our ship, it's the company that ultimately dictates where in the Thistle Nebula we're allowed to visit, for how long, and of course, it's ultimately their quote-unquote incentive that motivates us to act in their best interest while we're there. As a crew member, virtually every facet of our lives is controlled by this organization, and yet what we know about them is very slim. What purpose could collecting all of this scrap possibly serve? Why is an ever-increasing volume of it needed, quota after quota? And perhaps most pressing of all, what is the true identity of that thing behind the counter? Over time, we've pored over these questions again and again, and historically, with what little hints and evidence we have at our disposal, it hasn't exactly been possible to come to any sort of definitive conclusion. But recently, this dilemma has begun to creep into my mind yet again. So I began researching, and truth be told, I didn't expect to find much, but I'm happy to say that I was very wrong, because there's some very strong evidence I've never mentioned on this channel before that we definitely need to discuss. This is everything we know and everything we think we know about the most important corporate entity of the Thistle Nebula, all in hopes of finally answering the age-old question: what is inside the company? But before we get into that, it's no secret that sometimes the life of an employee can be a pretty hectic one, which is why it's so important to make the most of the rest we can get with today's sponsor, Manta Sleep. Known for their high-quality breathable sleep masks and other sleep accessories, Manta Sleep's mission is to empower light sleepers to sleep better so they can do more. And with a wide selection of adjustable, premium-feeling masks, there's definitely something for everyone. Every Manta Sleep mask features 100% blackout to promote deeper sleep, is infinitely adjustable for a personalized fit, made of soft, breathable, and durable materials, and the mask itself, as well as any of their specially made eye cups, are designed specifically to avoid pressure on the eye during use. There are tons of different masks and products to choose from your regular everyday sleep mask to silk masks, and my personal favorite, the Manta Cool, featuring cold therapy technology to soothe both eyes and sinuses, the latter of which, as you can probably tell by my nasally inflection, is very much appreciated. So what are you waiting for? Join the pro-nap movement today and grab 10% off your order while promoting the restful sleep you deserve. That's 10% using my link in the description or code Everberon, EVERBERON, at checkout. Thanks again to Manta Sleep for sponsoring this video, and now that we're all rested and refreshed, let's get back to the task at hand. Now, in order to get to the bottom of this, let's start by reviewing everything that we already know, which, admittedly, isn't a lot. The logical place to start when looking for information pertaining to what's inside the company building would seemingly be the company building itself, but honestly, in spite of its massive size and brutalist construction, there's just not a lot to go off of here. It ought to go without saying that the mystique of the facility on 71 Gordian is a very intentional part of Lethal Company's world-building, and so by design, the characteristically featureless walls offer little insight into the inner workings of the facility. But of course, there is one method provided to us for interacting with this colossal structure, and that is the reception window. Sometimes referred to as the company desk, the window is the only true relief of any kind in the entirety of the building, the only point of interruption that we know of across miles of otherwise sheer concrete, all for the sole purpose of admitting scrap. And as we already know, whatever entity seems to be manning that window, it certainly is not human. Now, for employees who mind the rules detailed in the ship's operations manual, you may never have the misfortune of having to confront the beast at the window directly. Under normal circumstances, when scrap is admitted, a long hook simply pulls the goods inside. But on the off chance one is brazen enough to disturb the quiet of the platform, or gratuitously ring the company bell, it won't be long before the infamous pair of bristling red tentacles emerges to violently set them right, snatching away the helpless employee and pulling them into the building beyond. Now this is all pretty surface level information, things that virtually every employee is pretty much guaranteed to know as early as their first quota. And indeed, for many players, this may be all they'll ever know. But while direct observation will only take us so far, luckily there is another source, a much older one, that by the time the game takes place, has easily stood as our most complete record of company-related knowledge for the better part of 600 years. Revelations made, of course, by none other than Desmond. You probably thought I was going to say Sigurd there, huh? Well, allow me to explain. At this point, we all ought to be familiar with the legend of Sigurd, a crewmate from the company's ancient past who's responsible for penning what have become the only written records of a crew besides our own in the entirety of Lethal Company history. Both the man himself and his various journal entries, which we can find scattered across the surfaces of moons we visit in the modern day, are essential parts of the game's world-building, and have become regular topics of discussion both on this channel and in the community at large. But although Sigurd is the primary chronicler of his crew's misadventures, he isn't the only one, because from time to time, Desmond, the team leader and gifted technologies expert, has been known to author entries as well, and even when he's not the one writing, it's usually Desmond that actually makes the discoveries we're concerned with here, a prime example of which can be seen in the story that unfolds throughout the month of September 1968. While the first several entries of Sigurd's logs mostly detail the crew's acclamation to their work at the company, it's the untimely death of their teammate Richard on Vow that serves as one of the first major events of their journey. Not only does it imbue them with a newfound sense of dread and mortality, but reporting the death necessitates a call to the company itself, an event which Sigurd reflects upon in the log simply entitled Screams. For some reason, I was the one who had to call the company number to report the accident. They were too scared to do it. It was the same fake voice I remember from the interview on the phone at home and the stupid training videos. But I heard what it said, I think, because it said they would contact the family and find a replacement and something else. It talked so fast. Following this, in the log Idea, Desmond has a theory. He speculates that the company number could be traced, and 9 days later, in the log Nonsense, Sigurd tells us that his hypothesis did in fact bear fruit. Okay, so Desmond traced the call, and found out there's a group of people somewhere else that pretends to call us from the company building. They're across the whole solar system. Why would they be so far away? Of course, this is a pretty big revelation for two main reasons. First, it confirms that the company is perhaps a more complicated and decentralized organization than we may have assumed based on our own experiences. Clearly, there's some kind of administrative body overseeing whatever work is being done, but it also reinforces the overarching mystery. If the company building doesn't house personnel or systems, then what does it contain? And from this point forward, as Desmond begins penning his own logs, starting with the entry of the same name on October 9th, he comes to a similar conclusion as many others who have come after him. Desmond, October 4th, 1968. Using the log entry system I designed for Sigurd, but I'm making this one private to keep it safe from discovery, as it would damage the team morale. We might not meet our quota tonight. I believe it's all a guise. We're supposed to think it's all just a transaction, but our real job is keeping an unstoppable terror fed. How long until its fullness ends and its hunger is insatiable? God knows. Maybe it has to do with all these desolate moons. Whoever reads this, I'm sorry to burden you with this. Please have a good night and work hard, as what else is there for us to do? Although the precise verbiage of this log has been updated since the release of the recent Lethal Company version 70, it easily remains as one of the most foundational pieces of writing in the entire game, and the reasons why ought to be fairly clear. If what Desmond alleges is true, then the company's true purpose is hiring workers not to collect materials for salvage, but instead for the purpose of feeding whatever evil lies within. And as it turns out, this is a theory that many in the community have already ascribed to, even without understanding Desmond's testimony. The idea that the company monster is eating the material we provide is not new, and although Desmond himself is sure to specify that it's only a theory, this log, which prior to version 70 was the final testimony in the Zeekerss series, is often seen as pretty damning confirmation of this idea. Obviously, we'll talk more about this theory later on, but there's still one more important piece of information to glean from Desmond's time with the company, and I think it's safe to say, it's one of the strangest pieces of information yet. When version 70 released back at the end of May, it brought with it a substantial amount of new content. New rooms and layouts were added to mansions, the ship's UI received an overhaul, a new enemy was added, and perhaps most important of all, 2 new Zeekerss logs were hidden across various moons. Some of you may already be acquainted with the lore here if you watched my dedicated video about the update, but for the most part, what's important to understand is that these new logs are effectively the culmination of Zeekerss' entire story arc up to this point. Sprinkled in amongst the rest of him and his crew's misadventures, there are a number of occurrences that can only be described as supernatural. In fact, such events permeate the entire storyline, making their first and most major appearance in the infamous log Golden Planet, where Zeekerss speaks to a voice inside the company building. I talked to a voice on the walkie-talkie. It was like a part of the pestle and mortar. He told me the Golden Planet actually existed. It's not a legend. And he told me it didn't just hit a meteor. He said the planet was swallowed up by the beast, and they were in its body being digested. I asked what the beast is, and he said he didn't know. He said it ate the planet, and they forgot everything. I couldn't get him to stop talking, but I said he was on the other side of a big wall, and I could get him out. I said he was inside the building, and that's when he started freaking out. I couldn't make out a word. I think he said something about spitting out the rinds, so I just turned it off. What a whack. It's a pretty important log which seems to further support the assumption that whatever lies inside the building is somehow eating the material employees provide it, but what's more is that from this point forward, the encounters never truly stop. And by the time of the log Team Synergy, the visions, hauntings, and hallucinations have escalated to a dramatic new extreme. I haven't felt like writing, no time, but last night I swear I heard Dad talking to me from the vent, the one under the charger. I don't feel crazy. Man, that's what they all say. Yeah, I know. Well, I'm writing this log to keep myself sane, right? So I'll write about it. He was asking where he was, breathing really deep, like he couldn't breathe, like he was getting pulled into the engine. He sounded scared. He said he was thirsty. I never heard Dad like that. Maybe I just don't get enough sleep. Geesh, how am I gonna do it now? Maybe I should just open the thing up and look. Zeekerss doesn't end up going through with this, but nevertheless, it's clear that something is wrong. It's difficult to discern whether he's merely fatigued from the ever-mounting quota and the other occupational hazards of company work, or whether there really is something more going on here. But everything becomes a bit more clear in the next, and to date, latest entry, where we once again hear from Desmond, who presents a shocking discovery. This is Desmond. Zeekerss is unable to write, but I feel the need to keep a record, and none of us are sleeping tonight. After the incident, he's practically catatonic. He says he heard his father's voice in the air intake vent under the charger several days ago. I wish he'd told us before the incident, but I'm liable to believe he's being honest, at least to himself. In this state, he'd be a danger to himself and others, so we've been reduced to a 3-man crew. A hard blow I'm afraid we can't afford. This is how Jess and Lucas recounted it. There was a scraping sound, of which they soon located the vent as the source. They took this as a sign of the ship needing maintenance, and perhaps an oil change. Lucas went to grab the tools just to check. However, before he returned, the vent burst with a chunky red fluid, with what were almost surely bits of bone and hair, which spread across the floor like the contents of a clogged toilet. Fully emptying the vent, cleaning out the ship, and eradicating the stench was a challenge I wouldn't wish on anyone, especially with Sigurd trying to stop us. Now the smell of bleach burning our nostrils is a relief. Why? Why did it happen? I can't reasonably entertain Sigurd's explanation that somehow his father was inside the ship. He has always been quite imaginative, not to mention his current state. I believe the crew before us, or the crew before that, is simply responsible for attempting to avoid a fine, and the method was to hide their mistake. The victims' remains have been dumped out, and we will never identify them. At this point, you might be thinking, well, that's cool and all, but how does any of this actually relate to the matter of what's inside the company? And that's probably especially true if you watched my previous video analyzing these texts, because one of my conclusions then was that these couple of passages seemingly confirm something many of us have suspected since release. Sigurd is not a reliable narrator, and my initial impression after reading the conflicting viewpoints presented in these latest two entries was honestly little more than writing off many of his harder-to-explain experiences as merely the delusions of an unwell mind. But I think that sort of misses the point, because even if Sigurd is insane, Desmond confirms that he was also right in his own way. Although the body in the vent is never identified, the sheer fact that there was a body is eyebrow-raising. Sigurd may be tormented, yes, but it isn't proof that he's crazy. It's exactly the opposite. There was, for whatever reason, something, a intuition, that clued him in to the whereabouts of the body in the vent. One might even say that it seems Sigurd somehow has the ability to converse with the dead, but that's a can of worms I'm not prepared to open right now. The bottom line, though, and the thing that's important for our conversation today, is that whatever occurred here, it wasn't random circumstance. This is almost certainly somehow related to the company. It's not clear exactly how, but the fact that Sigurd only hears these voices in the company ship or at the company building definitely seems significant enough to keep in our back pocket. So with all of this in mind, we can actually start to build a pretty comprehensive profile of the company, at least in the abstract. We know that the company is a robust and at least partially decentralized organization, and that the site we know as the company building is not the main hub of that organization's operations. In spite of this though, there seems to be an effort to keep this fact under wraps, and it's actually as if the company wants us to believe they are operating out of the building on 71 Gordian. But realistically, we already know the purpose this facility serves is likely to be very different. This thing is probably a sort of prison or tomb, just as Desmond's theory would seem to suggest. And all things considered, I think that theory really does hold a lot of weight. Given the information we have, his conclusions definitely seem the most plausible, and at least ostensibly, the company monster seems to be an almost archetypical example of a true cosmic horror. If we entertain the odd, very questionable testimony presented in Golden Planet, we're led to believe that whatever is in here has the capacity to digest entire planets, and it wouldn't be strange to suggest that it's because of this voracious appetite that it may have been sealed away in the building to begin with. Not only this, but I can't help but feel that the monster is also somehow responsible for Sigurd's hallucinations, and it's largely because of the odd association those occurrences tend to have with themes of death and digestion. So we have an overarching theme, a voracious, godlike entity whose appetite can't be satiated, a creature of such immense power and influence that it's pointless to refuse its servitude. In a way, we need the beast as much as it needs us. And knowing this, I think it's time we take a look at this from a different angle. Something that's easily lost in all of the theory crafting and odd details of the company monster conversation is how it relates not to the context of Lethal Company as a world, but Lethal Company as a game. Just like a lot of other prominent elements of this title, there's a certain level of symbolism that often goes unaddressed, even though a lot of us probably already understand it pretty well on a subconscious level. It's no secret that as a work of art, Lethal Company very much concerns itself with themes central to the idea of corporatism and the ways that employees function under overbearing and often unfair working conditions. Think about it, the entire gameplay loop is centered around the idea of ever-increasing responsibility, the constant and exponential sense of demand that such work can instill, and of course the looming consequences of coming up short. But from this view, the company and the company monster aren't really distinct concepts. Greed, exploitation, and ceaseless hunger aren't just words to describe some Lovecraftian terror, they also describe the company itself. It's as if the two aren't separate entities at all, and this is something that's even hinted at in the context of the game itself. Somewhat famously, in the log Hiding, Sigurd reflects on a dream he has where the company building bursts open to reveal the terror that's inside. But the way he refers to it is perhaps not what we would expect. He doesn't call it the monster, the beast, or any other similar name. He simply refers to the thing inside the company building as the company. Which naturally begs the question, what if the monster really is just an abstraction? It's a compelling possibility, but one that I don't think has ever seriously been considered, largely because it admittedly conflicts with a lot of the aforementioned evidence presented elsewhere in-game. In other words, if there is some message to be gleaned about the company being the real monster this whole time, then how would we reckon with that given all of the other behaviors and very physical evidence we have to the contrary? It's all pretty counterintuitive, and without further information, it would seem our hands are tied here. Could there really be nothing more to learn? Is this mystery well and truly cold? For the majority of Lethal Company's life, this has pretty much been the extent of what we've known about the company and the monster within. The only truly new information we have to go off of here are the additions of the log's Team Synergy and Letter of Resignation, which were added in version 70, but all things considered, the core of the mystery hasn't really changed much since release. We have some idea of how and why the beast may have become trapped within the building in the first place, but the ultimate reveal, it seems, is still being left for the end of Lethal Company's story, which, though a topic we've received some interesting new insights about in recent times, still remains firmly outside our current understanding. Or at least, so it would seem. And it's here where I finally get to reveal to you some dramatic new evidence. Not so long ago, we found ourselves in the midst of what was, without a doubt, the longest content drought in Lethal Company history. From August 2024 to May 2025, the future of the company and its employees was definitely uncertain. But starting in late March, progress reports pertaining to an inevitable update began to appear over on the Patreon profile of Zeekerss, Lethal Company's creator. At first, progress was slow going, but little by little, communication and talks of development progress would increase in regularity, right up until the point when the update we know today as version 70 would finally release on May 31st, 2025. It was certainly an interesting time in the community, and seeing as it was some of the first new content in such a long span of time, all of the new features and lore presented in version 70 easily dominated most discussion. But in the commotion, there was one thing Zeekerss mentioned within his progress reports that seems to have slipped through the cracks. Posted on April 30th, 2025, almost exactly 1 month prior to version 70's eventual release, the entry "Working towards an end goal" is, for the most part, a fairly typical example of a Patreon update post from this era. It starts off by offering some insights into some of the new features that were to arrive with version 70, such as the new ship UI and overhaul to the moon adamants, both of which are points we've talked about before in previous videos. But there was also another section here, one in which Zeekerss spoke quite freely about the end of the game, and as we're about to see, what he reveals here has some gargantuan implications. I mentioned in a previous post that Lethal Company's ending must answer an impossible question. What do you do in the face of an unfathomable, unstoppable, all-pervasive evil? I've known how I want to answer it. For one thing, if it's not a message of actual hope, I'm just not going to bother. And yet, I want it to feel realistic and honest. Altogether, Lethal Company has always been about confronting despair, and I desperately want to find a truthful answer to it. I don't think I made Lethal Company as a political thing or a deeply personal thing. The theme just naturally formed, driven by corporate greed is funny. But through Sigurd's logs, I think I channeled a genuine fear of being worked to death, or of working myself to death, alone, out of some kind of faceless fear, sacrificing my whole life to a system that would allow me to do just that, only that, forever. I've been gradually narrowing down on where this personal story intersects with the grander story, and as I observed what is happening in the world over the past month, and really over my whole generation, I think I nailed the answer to that impossible question. All along, the monster has no power at all, and hopelessness, confusion, and resignation is all it has against us. As for how this idea will play out in-game exactly, I still don't know, but with my compass set, I think it won't be long before that mysterious ending starts to crystallize. And so we've reached the final, and what certainly seems to be the most likely possibility for just what lies inside the company. For all intents and purposes, according to Zeekerss himself, it seems that the true culprit, the true icon of fear stuffed away inside that labyrinthian cage, has been nothing all along. Now, if you're anything like me, then there's probably a mix of emotions that come along with Zeekerss' testimony here. When I first read this, I remember how liberating it was to finally have some idea of what was to come, but at the same time, this explanation seems very much at odds with the direction the game has been leading us toward, seemingly from the beginning. How? How could the company actually be a monument to nothing? Thematically, I think it's perfect, beautiful even, and lends itself very well to the kind of story Zeekerss wants to tell. But in a literal sense, from an in-game perspective, I don't think this can possibly be the entire truth. But simply put, the more I've thought about it, the more sense it's begun to make. Once more, the most important thing to understand about the company is what it represents. According to Zeekerss himself, the company isn't just meant to represent corporatism. It's meant as a way for players to confront themes of excessive work and unfair labor in their own play. It's a sort of thought experiment in and of itself. Stuck in a system like that, how do we, as players, as employees, find meaning and keep going quota after quota? How are we incentivized to entertain that mindless grind day after day? And the answer, as Zeekerss sees it, ultimately boils down to deception. The system perpetuates because we believe it does, because we believe we're making some kind of difference, doing some kind of good, or at the very least, preventing something worse. But that belief doesn't necessarily reflect reality, and though there may be some kind of monster within the company walls, it may not be nearly as terrible, powerful, or omnipotent as we've been led to believe. Perhaps when we finally are able to activate the drill beneath the company platform and dig at last into the building once and for all, the thing that awaits us is simply nothing more than the backside of a careful facade. Maybe it was all smoke and mirrors all along. The voices, the building itself, all of it merely a fabrication to instill a sense of obligation to our work. It's not that the beast at the window doesn't exist, it just isn't a sizable threat. It never has been. The only power it's ever truly had has been in our own minds all along. And this, I believe, is the truest answer, or at least the most realistic that we have in the present day, to finally answer Lethal Company's oldest and most pervasive question. However, I'll be the first to remind you that all of this is ultimately just speculation, and although I've tried to present the evidence in such a way that hopefully some of you may also feel compelled to come to your own conclusions, there's also plenty of other potentially relevant aspects of Lethal Company lore that we never even touched on here. Although neither of the currently revealed opening cinematics seem to make any direct reference to the company in any way, how do they factor into this? Is there more to the story of the Golden Planet than I've given it credit for. Has my long-standing joke theory that the company monster is simply an oversized man-eater been right all along? Alright, well we can probably pretty comfortably write off that last one, but the point is that there is obviously still a lot to learn about this world. Who knows, when version 80 comes out, things could go in a completely different direction. It's a part of what makes this game so much fun to analyze. But regardless of what happens next, rest assured that as always, I'll be here to cover it, right up until, and in all honesty, probably even after, the game's inevitable end. So yeah, what do you think of that, huh? Pretty exciting stuff. I'm telling you, man, I'm not crazy. Once this drill is done, it's gonna be sick. Oh wait, what's that? Oh, you're wondering when I'm gonna fly you back to Adamance so you can finish your quota. Shoot, man, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. It's just so easy to lose track of time when you're theorizing, you know? But no, you're right. There's work to be done. So, until next time, this is Everberon. I'll see you again soon, and have a good one.